I stood at the airport gate on Christmas Eve, watching my boarding pass get rejected. My father had died 3 days ago, and my sister had just made sure I couldn't say goodbye. What she didn't know was that Dad had seen her cruelty coming, and he'd given me something she never expected: total control over everything she thought she'd inherit. My name is Holly, and I'm the invisible daughter. For the past 3 years, I'd been the one living in Dad's guest house, managing his dialysis treatments at 3 a.m., organizing his medications, and holding his hand through the pain. Meanwhile, my older sister Tiffany was busy posting Instagram photos at charity galas, spending his money on designer bags, and telling everyone what a devoted daughter she was. The gate agent looked at me with pity as she explained that my reservation had been canceled 10 minutes earlier by the primary account holder. My hands were shaking as I checked my phone. There it was, a text from Tiffany. "Don't bother coming. You were always a burden to him. Stay in your flyover state where you belong." I tried to stay calm, but my vision blurred with tears. The funeral was in 36 hours. I'd packed Dad's favorite photo of us, the one from my college graduation where he looked so proud. Now I was standing in Terminal C with a garment bag containing my black dress and nowhere to go. The worst part wasn't just the canceled flight. When I tried to book another one with my credit card, the transaction was declined. Then the second card. Then the third. I called the bank from a corner near the bathrooms, my voice barely holding steady. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the representative said. "These accounts have been flagged for suspicious activity by a family member with power of attorney. They're temporarily frozen pending investigation." That's when I understood the full scope of what Tiffany had done. She'd used her temporary power as executor, granted only because Dad had died suddenly, to cut off my access to everything. I was stranded 3,000 miles from home with $17 in my purse. I sat on a cold plastic chair near the food court, surrounded by families laughing and hugging as they traveled home for Christmas. Kids ran past me clutching candy canes. Couples held hands. And I was alone, unable to afford even a bottle of water to wash down the lump in my throat. I thought about calling someone for help, but who? My boss, Mr. Henderson, was visiting his daughter in Seattle. My college friends were scattered across the country with their own families. Dad had always been my person, and now he was gone. The airport announcements kept playing cheerful holiday music. Every song felt like a knife. "I'll Be Home for Christmas" came on, and I had to bite my sleeve to keep from sobbing out loud. A little girl walked past eating a pretzel, and my stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since that morning. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Tiffany's social media. She'd already posted a photo of herself in an elegant black dress, standing in front of Dad's casket at the funeral home. The caption read, "Saying goodbye to my hero. He raised me to be strong. I'll make you proud, Daddy." The comments were full of heart emojis and condolences. Nobody knew that she'd only visited him twice in the last year, and both times were to ask for money. Nobody knew that I was the one who'd held the bucket when he was sick, who'd learned to cook his special low-sodium meals, who'd read him the newspaper every morning because his eyes were too weak. I managed to use the cash Dad had hidden in my jewelry box years ago, emergency money he'd insisted I keep separate from everything else. It was enough for a bus ticket, but barely. The ride home would take 30 hours with multiple transfers. As I sat in the bus station waiting for the midnight departure, I replayed the last 3 years in my mind. I'd moved across the country to be with Dad after his diagnosis. I'd left a promising job in marketing to work as a mid-level project manager at a construction firm in his city, something that paid less but had flexible hours. Tiffany had stayed in New York, living in the penthouse Dad paid for. She'd never changed a single plan for him. When he asked her to visit for Thanksgiving, she'd said she had a very important Fashion Week event. The event turned out to be a cocktail party for her friend's boutique opening. But to the outside world, Tiffany was the successful daughter. She had hundreds of thousands of social media followers. She went to the right parties, knew the right people, and wore the right clothes. I was just the younger sister who never quite lived up to her potential. Dad knew the truth, though. In his final months, when he could barely speak above a whisper, he'd held my hand and said, "You're the builder, Holly. She's the breaker. I should have seen it sooner." 2 months before Dad died, he'd called me into his study. It was late October, and the leaves outside were turning gold. He looked so frail sitting in his leather chair, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "I need you to keep something safe for me," he'd said, pulling out a small encrypted USB drive from his desk drawer. "Don't open it until the first sunrise of the new year. And Holly, don't tell Tiffany. Not yet." I'd asked him what it was, but he just shook his head. "Insurance," he'd said. "I found out she's been selling my vintage car collection behind my back. 3 cars so far. She told me they were in storage." My heart had broken for him. Those cars weren't just possessions, they were his memories. The 1967 Mustang was the car he'd driven on his first date with Mom. The Corvette was what he'd bought himself when his first building sold, and she'd liquidated them for purse money. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he'd said, seeing my expression. "I know this puts you in a terrible position, but you're the only one I trust to do the right thing." I'd taken the USB drive and hidden it in a waterproof case inside my storage unit. I didn't know what was on it, but I knew it was important. The bus ride was a nightmare. The seats were cramped, the air conditioning was broken, and we stopped every few hours at depressing rest stops. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Dad lying in his hospital bed, asking when I'd arrive. On the second day of the trip, Christmas morning, I watched Tiffany's live stream of the funeral. My phone barely had signal, and the video kept buffering, but I saw enough. She sat in the front row of the church, wearing a black veil and designer heels, sobbing dramatically for the cameras. The seat next to her, the one she'd promised me in a text 2 weeks ago, was empty. Intentionally, visibly empty. She'd even put her purse on it so no one else could sit there. The minister talked about Dad's dedication to family, and Tiffany nodded and dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. I was watching my father's funeral from a bus stop bathroom in rural Pennsylvania, my phone propped against a soap dispenser. I couldn't even hear the eulogies over the sound of the hand dryer. When it was over, Tiffany posted a photo of herself releasing a white dove outside the church. The caption said, "His spirit is free now. I'll carry on his legacy with grace and strength." I turned off my phone before I threw it against the wall. When I finally reached the family estate 32 hours later, exhausted and hungry, the security guards wouldn't let me in. These were men I'd known for 3 years, men I'd made coffee for and chatted with on quiet afternoons. But they'd clearly received new orders. "I'm sorry, Holly," said Marcus, the head of security, avoiding my eyes. "Miss Tiffany has changed the access codes. She said you're not authorized to be on the property right now. She said," he paused, looking uncomfortable. "She said you're a disturbed relative looking for money." I stood at the gates of my father's house, the house where I'd lived in the guest cottage, where I'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases, where I'd said my final goodbye to Dad just days ago, and I wasn't allowed in. "Can I at least get my things from the guest house?" I asked. Marcus shook his head. "She had everything packed up and put in storage yesterday. She'll send you the unit information when things are settled." So I drove to the only place I could afford, a motel 3 miles from the estate that smelled like old cigarettes and industrial cleaner. The room cost $42 a night. The wallpaper was peeling, and the bedspread had suspicious stains, but it had a roof and a lock. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let myself cry. Really cry. The kind of crying that makes your chest hurt and your throat raw. I cried for Dad, for the funeral I'd missed, for the cruelty of being locked out of my own home, for everything. The next morning, I dragged myself to work. My boss, Mr. Henderson, took one look at my face and pulled me into his office. I worked as a project manager for his construction firm, and he'd always been kind to me, especially during Dad's illness. "Take the week," he said immediately. "Paid, and Holly." He pulled out his office keys. "The scanner in the copy room is high-speed and private. If you need to handle any estate documents, you're welcome to use it after hours." I almost cried again at his kindness. It was the first compassion anyone had shown me in days. That night, I went back to my storage unit, retrieved the USB drive, and returned to Mr. Henderson's office. My hands were shaking as I plugged the drive into his computer. I'd been carrying this secret for 2 months, and I was finally going to understand what Dad had meant by insurance. The drive contained hundreds of files, legal documents, scanned letters, financial records, and at the center of it all was something called the North Star Trust. I spent 6 hours reading through everything, my coffee going cold beside me as the full picture emerged. Dad hadn't just written a will. He'd created an entirely separate legal structure to protect his assets from Tiffany's greed. The North Star Trust contained everything of real value: the family estate, the commercial buildings downtown, the investment portfolio, the stocks, even the furniture and artwork. The public will that Tiffany was so excited about only covered whatever assets weren't held in the trust, which amounted to almost nothing of significance. But here was the crucial part. Tiffany wasn't the trustee. She was merely a beneficiary with zero control over distributions or decisions. The person with absolute power over the trust was designated as the successor trustee. I scrolled down to the signature page, my heart pounding. And there it was, in Dad's shaky handwriting from 3 months ago. Successor trustee with full fiduciary authority, Holly Marie Thompson. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from exhaustion. Dad hadn't just protected his assets. He'd put me in charge of everything. The trust documents included access to a digital portal that showed real-time financial activity. I logged in with the credentials from the USB drive and felt my stomach drop. Tiffany had been busy. In just the 5 days since Dad's death, she'd taken out over $3 million in bridge loans against the estate. The transaction descriptions made me sick. Yacht deposit, $800,000. Miami penthouse down payment, $1.2 million. Investment in T. Thompson fashion line, $500,000. She thought she was inheriting a bottomless pit of money. She didn't realize that every dollar she was spending belonged to the trust, not to her. And according to the trust documents I was reading, any unauthorized spending by a beneficiary was considered a personal loan that had to be repaid with 10% interest. I did the math. Tiffany had just buried herself in debt to the tune of over $3 million, and she didn't even know it yet. There was more. She'd already contacted a real estate agent about selling the family home for $12 million. She'd scheduled appraisals for Dad's art collection. She'd even tried to transfer the title of his vintage Mustang, the one she'd supposedly put in storage, into her own name. Every single action was documented in the portal. Every single action was unauthorized. Every single action was about to come back to haunt her. Among the files, I found a scanned letter addressed to me in Dad's handwriting. The date was from October, right after our conversation in his study. I had to read it through tears. "My dearest Holly," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry I can't be there to see the woman you'll continue to become. I'm sorry for putting this burden on you, but you're the only one I trust to do what's right. Your sister has a sickness, not the kind doctors can cure, but the kind that comes from never being told no, never facing consequences, never learning that love isn't measured in dollar signs. I enabled her for too long, and now I'm asking you to fix my mistakes. The North Star Trust isn't just about money. It's about protecting the people who depend on the businesses I built, the workers, the tenants, the families. Tiffany would sell everything and spend it on herself within a year. You'll build something that lasts. You are the builder, she is the breaker. I should have made that clear when you were both children. I'm making it clear now. Whatever happens, know that you were the light of my final years. You gave me dignity when I was dying. You gave me love when I needed it most. I'm sorry I can't protect you from what's coming, but I've given you the tools to protect yourself. All my love, Dad." I sat in that empty office and wept. The formal reading of the will was scheduled for January 1st at the family lawyer's office, 3 days away. Tiffany sent me a formal legal notice via email, informing me that I was permitted to attend only if I signed a waiver promising not to contest her authority as executor. I printed the waiver, signed it with a smile, and scanned it back to her lawyer. The waiver was legally worthless against what I was holding. You can't waive rights to something you already control. I spent those 3 days preparing. I made copies of every document. I consulted with Mr. Henderson's attorney friend, who nearly fell out of his chair when he saw the trust structure. "This is ironclad," he told me. "Your father knew exactly what he was doing." I also tracked down the original notary who'd witnessed Dad's signature on the trust documents. She confirmed everything was legitimate and said she'd testify if needed. Dad had covered every possible angle. On New Year's Eve, I sat in my depressing motel room eating a microwave dinner and watching fireworks through the dirty window. Outside, people were celebrating. Inside, I was preparing for war. New Year's morning arrived cold and clear. I put on my best suit, the one I wore to job interviews, navy blue and professional. I did my makeup carefully, making sure I looked composed and confident. Then I drove to the lawyer's office with a USB drive and a folder full of certified documents. Tiffany's car was already in the parking lot, a brand new Mercedes SUV, purchased with Dad's money. I parked my 7-year-old Honda next to it and walked inside. The receptionist led me to a conference room where Tiffany was holding court. She wore a black designer dress and heels that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. She was drinking champagne at 10 a.m. When I walked in, she looked me up and down and laughed. "I hope you enjoyed your bus ride, loser," she whispered, making sure only I could hear. "Don't get comfortable. You'll be leaving soon." I sat down across from her and smiled. "Happy New Year, Tiffany." The family lawyer, Mr. Benson, entered looking nervous. He was an older man who'd worked with Dad for 20 years, and he kept glancing between Tiffany and me like he was afraid of what was coming. "Let's begin," he said, sitting down and opening a leather folder. "This is the last will and testament of Richard Thomas Thompson, executed on—" "Can we skip the boring parts?" Tiffany interrupted, examining her nails. "Just tell me when I can access the accounts." Mr. Benson cleared his throat. "Miss Thompson, there are certain formalities." Fine, she waved her hand. "Just read it." He began reading the public will, the document that Tiffany thought controlled everything. It left her the house, the cars, and Dad's personal effects. She started clapping before he even finished. "Perfect," she said. "Holly, you can have whatever clothes or photos you want from your little cottage, but I need you out by the end of the week. I'm having the place renovated into a yoga studio." I said nothing. I just reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. "Mr. Benson," I said calmly, "that will only applies to assets not held in trust. I believe you're missing some critical documentation." His face went pale. "Miss Holly, what are you?" I slid the certified trust documents across the table. "The North Star Trust, executed 4 months ago and properly filed with the county clerk. It supersedes any provisions in the public will for assets contained within the trust structure." Tiffany grabbed the papers and started reading. "What is this? This is fake. She made this up." "It's notarized," I said. "Witnessed by 3 independent parties, filed with the appropriate authorities. Your lawyer can verify the filing date and authenticity in about 30 seconds. Mr. Benson was already typing on his laptop. I watched his face change as he confirmed everything. The room was dead silent except for the clicking of his keyboard. "This is impossible," Tiffany said, her voice rising. "Daddy would have told me he would have." "He did tell someone," I said quietly. "He told me, 2 months before he died, when he found out you'd been selling his cars behind his back." Mr. Benson finished his verification and looked up at us with an expression I couldn't quite read. "The documents are legitimate," he said slowly. "The North Star Trust was filed on September 15th and contains the majority of Mr. Thompson's assets, including the primary residence, all commercial properties, investment accounts, and—" he paused, reading more carefully, "and all personal property within the residence, including vehicles, artwork, and furnishings." "That's impossible," Tiffany slammed her hand on the table. The house is mine, the will says. The will says you inherit the house at 1247 Oak Street, I said. But according to the property records, which I pulled yesterday, 1247 Oak Street is owned by the North Star Trust. You can inherit it all you want, but you can't inherit something that isn't Dad's to give. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Who controls this trust then? Who gets to decide? She stopped mid-sentence as Mr. Benson turned to the signature page. The successor trustee with absolute fiduciary authority over all distributions and decisions, he read aloud, is Holly Marie Thompson. The champagne glass slipped from Tiffany's hand and shattered on the floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. This is fraud, Tiffany said, her voice shaking. She manipulated him. He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. I'll contest this. Your father was evaluated by 2 independent physicians in September, Mr. Benson interrupted. I have their reports here. Both confirmed he was of sound mind and fully understood the implications of his decisions. He executed these documents with full legal counsel present. I pulled out another paper from my folder. I'd also like to exercise my right as trustee to request an immediate audit of all estate spending since Dad's death on December 21st. Tiffany's face changed from red to white in an instant. What? The trust rules are very clear, I said, keeping my voice level even though my heart was racing. Any spending by beneficiaries must be authorized by the trustee. Unauthorized spending is considered a personal loan from the estate, repayable with 10% annual interest. Mr. Benson was already pulling up the estate accounts. I watched his eyes widen as he saw the numbers. Miss Tiffany, Mr. Benson said carefully, have you made any significant purchases or taken out any loans against the estate in the past week? I bought some things, she stammered, but that's my inheritance. I can spend my own money. It's not your money, I said. It's the trust's money, and I didn't authorize any of it. I pulled out my own printouts from the digital portal. Let's see. An $800,000 deposit on a yacht, a $1.2 million down payment on a Miami penthouse, $500,000 invested in your fashion line, approximately $200,000 in designer clothes and jewelry. Should I continue? Tiffany stood up so fast her chair fell over. You can't do this. You're nobody. You're just the daughter who never amounted to anything, who wasted her life playing nurse. I'm the trustee, I said quietly. And according to the trust documents, you now owe the estate approximately $3.2 million, payable immediately or subject to collection proceedings. The room was silent, except for Tiffany's rapid breathing. Mr. Benson confirmed everything. The trust rules were explicit. Any unauthorized distribution to a beneficiary was treated as a loan, not a gift. Tiffany had spent $3.2 million without approval, and now she had to pay it back. But I don't have that money, Tiffany said, and for the first time I heard real fear in her voice. It's already spent. The contracts are signed. Then you'll need to break those contracts and return the funds, I said, or liquidate your personal assets to cover the debt. My personal. I don't have $3 million in personal assets. Then you have a problem. She turned to Mr. Benson desperately. You're her lawyer too, aren't you? You have to help me. There must be something. I'm the estate's lawyer, he said carefully. And right now, the estate is demanding repayment of an unauthorized loan. That's a legal debt, Miss Tiffany. If you can't repay it, the estate can pursue collection against any assets you do have. I watched the realization hit her. The new Merceds, the jewelry, the designer clothes, everything she'd bought with Dad's money over the years was about to be taken back. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out another document. The family home at 1247 Oak Street. The trust owns it, which means the trust decides who lives there. As trustee, I'm formally notifying you that you have 48 hours to vacate the premises. You're evicting me, Tiffany's voice was shrill. You're evicting me from my own father's house. It's not your house, I said. It's the trust's house. And since you've been so vocal about me being a burden, I'm sure you'll understand that the trust can no longer afford to house non-contributing guests. Non-contributing, I'm his daughter. So am I stood up and gathered my papers. The difference is, I was here, I held his hand. I changed his bandages. I sat with him at 3 a.m. when he couldn't sleep. Where were you, Tiffany? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. You have 48 hours, I repeated. The locks will be changed on January 4th at noon. Anything you leave behind becomes property of the trust. Tiffany tried one last manipulation. She started crying, real tears this time, not the performative sobbing from the funeral. She reached for me across the table. Holly, please, she sobbed. I'm sorry, I was wrong. I was stressed from the grief, I wasn't thinking clearly. We're sisters. We're family. Daddy would want us to work together, he'd want. I stepped back before she could touch me. Don't, I said. Don't you dare talk about what Dad would want. If you'd cared about what he wanted, you would have visited him more than twice in his final year. You would have been there for his treatments instead of at Fashion Week. I'll pay you back, she said desperately. I'll sell the yacht deposit, I'll cancel the penthouse, You should have thought about that before you canceled my flight. My voice was harder than I'd ever heard it. Before you froze my credit cards and left me stranded in an airport on Christmas Eve. Before you told security I was a disturbed relative. Before you made sure I couldn't say goodbye to the only person who ever loved me. She had nothing to say to that. After the meeting, I contacted the bank that had issued the bridge loans. I provided them with the trust documents and my authority as trustee, and formally notified them that the estate would not be honoring the loans Tiffany had taken out. The bank was polite but firm. They would be pursuing collection against Tiffany personally for the full amount, plus fees. They'd already started the process of putting liens on her assets. Within 24 hours, the Mercedes was repossessed from the estate driveway. Her credit cards were canceled. Her bank accounts were frozen pending the debt resolution. Everything she'd bought with Dad's money was being clawed back, piece by piece. She called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer. On the 18th call, I picked up. You've destroyed me, she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. I have nothing. No money, no home, no credit. You've taken everything. No, I said. I've taken back what was never yours to begin with. Everything you had was Dad's money, Dad's generosity, Dad's love, and you threw it all away. I'm your sister. Then you should have acted like it. I hung up. On January 3rd, I drove to the estate. The guards recognized me now, not as a disturbed relative, but as their boss. As the trustee, I technically employed them. I'd already told them they'd all keep their jobs with raises. I walked through the house slowly. It felt different without Dad, empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture. But it also felt peaceful, safe. His study still smelled like his cologne. His reading chair still had the blanket I'd knitted for him. I sat in that chair and thought about what came next. The trust wasn't just money, it was responsibility. Dad's commercial buildings employed hundreds of people. His residential properties housed dozens of families. The investment portfolio funded local scholarships. Tiffany would have liquidated all of it for purse money. I was going to protect it, build on it, make it mean something. That's what Dad had wanted when he made me trustee. Not revenge, protection. The movers arrived at the estate on January 4th at 9 a.m. Tiffany was there with 3 trucks, clearly planning to take as much as possible. But the security team I'd hired was ready. She tried to load up Dad's vintage watch collection. The guards stopped her. Only personal clothing and items you can prove you purchased yourself, I said, standing in the doorway. Everything else stays. These watches were gifts from Daddy. Gifts from the estate, I corrected, which means they belong to the trust. You can take the clothes in your closet, nothing else. I watched as she carried out load after load of designer bags and shoes, all purchased with Dad's credit cards over the years. The neighbors were outside watching. The same neighbors who'd seen her social media posts about being the devoted daughter. Now they watched her load her belongings into a taxi, because she couldn't even afford a moving truck. As she loaded the last bag into the taxi, I walked down the driveway. I was holding something in my hand, a bus ticket. The same route I'd taken from the airport. "It's a long ride," I said, handing it to her. 30 hours with multiple stops, but it gives you plenty of time to think. She looked at the ticket, then at me. For the first time in our lives, I saw her really see me. Not as the invisible little sister, not as the daughter who never amounted to anything, but as the person who'd outplayed her at every turn. "I underestimated you," she said quietly. "Everyone did," I replied. "That was your first mistake." She got into the taxi without another word. I watched it drive away, taking her out of the estate, out of my life, out of the picture she'd painted where she was the star and I was nothing. The gates closed behind her. That evening, I walked out to the garden where Dad used to sit every morning with his coffee. The sun was setting on January 4th, 2025, the first real day of my new life. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I wasn't the one who never amounted to anything. I was the trustee of a multi-million-dollar estate, responsible for protecting everything Dad had built. More importantly, I was the daughter who'd been there, the one who'd held his hand, the one he'd trusted with his legacy. I sat in his favorite chair and watched the sky turn pink and gold. "I'll take care of it, Dad," I said out loud. "I'll take care of everything you built, I promise." The wind rustled through the trees, and for just a moment I could almost feel him there beside me. Proud, relieved, at peace. Tiffany had tried to erase me from his funeral, from his life, from his memory. Instead, she'd erased herself. And I was exactly where I was supposed to be, keeping the light on, protecting what mattered, honoring the man who'd seen me when everyone else looked away. The North Star Trust wasn't just a legal document. It was Dad's final gift to me, proof that I was never invisible at all. I'd always been the one who mattered most.